It is my great pleasure to be among you and share my talk about this. So, Nirvana is our final destination. It is what awaits us at the end of our journey in the words of manifestation, or even before, if we reach enlightenment. So, according to the great Theosophists who preceded us, Nirvana is impossible to understand with our current capacities. It is a state of being in which absolute existence and unconditional unity are experienced. It is a state that human language is absolutely powerless to describe. Nonetheless, we can at least take a look at how people have tried to approach this state and define it in words in theosophical literature. Nirvana is a state of absolute consciousness in which the immortal part of human form are in subjective existence. The immortal parts in question are the monad. And so let us see what that means. Monad comes from the Greek for one, for unit. And Blavatsky defined it as a spark from the uncreated ray, the direct radiant progeny of the One, of the Absolute. And at the start of its descent or evolution, in the words of manifestation, it consists of two principles. Atma, the universal principle, which is one with the Father, or one universal spirit, and Buddhi, its vahana or vehicle. Metaphorically speaking, it might be compared to bungee jumping. Just like a monad, the jumpers throw themselves into manifestation, but they remain attached to something. An elastic cord in one case and a golden thread in the other. This stops them from ending up smashed to pieces at the bottom of a ravine or plunging into the lowest depths of hell in the case of the soul on its pilgrimage. The cord is the right length to stop the jumpers from getting hurt. And inside the monad, there is a light of the right brightness to guide the travelers and stop them from getting lost. It lights their way. There are some very rare cases of souls that are lost or smashed up to pieces, if we use the bungee jumping metaphor, but only because their baseness has let them voluntarily cut the cord, the sutratma, that kept them connected to the light or absolute. This does not mean that their former, in this case, monads, have stopped shining, but just that the souls in question have cut ties with their monads, leaving them unable to find their way home and evolve. They have let go of the cord that lifted them up from the swamps of darkness and lost the light guiding them to their destination. But in any case, we shall come back to this later. Reflecting on the definition of nirvana, we can say that it is the state of absolute consciousness of a monad that has gone back home and merged with the one universal principle, or more poetically, the dewdrop has slipped back into the shining sea, or the shining sea merges into the drop, or the spark has turned back into a flame. In the West, the word nirvana is often translated with the term annihilation. And while this is in a technically correct translation, it does not take into account the inherent sublimity in the concept of nirvana. And it does not properly state what is annihilated, leaving the reader with a sense of destruction, extinction, and loss. It does not even come close to expressing what can really be felt. Nirvana does not involve extinction because, like a flame that is put out, every particle of material is extinguished. But this is done to make room for the absolute spirit, the absolute consciousness. The monad breathes life into the living being. The thread, tiny to the absolute, becomes brighter and stronger as a living being achieves more and more. And it is the monad that enters nirvana once it has been stripped of its lower shells and then emerges once again from that glorious state in the new Manvantara. Every atom of the seven principles, even the most shining ones of Atma Buddhi, must remain outside the gateway of Nirvana. At its threshold, the monad reassumes its primeval essence and becomes the absolute once more. And this is the secret doctrine. Only the divine ideation, the consciousness, the carrier of absolute memory, can cross the threshold. However, at the end of the pralaya, when the cycle of life starts over with the new Manvantara, the thread of radiance, which is imperishable and dissolves only in nirvana, re-emerges from it in its integrity on the day when the great law calls all things back into action. And here there is a great mystery hidden. It seems impossible. It is due to these unique individual qualities that the dewdrop can slip into the shining sea and not get lost. And I quote, although all monads enter the state of nirvana at the end of the solar Manvantara, each of them retains consciousness of its own individuality. Each one knows itself. This is considered an impenetrable teaching. As in the words of HPB, the human mind cannot, in its present stage of development, transcend, scarcely reach this plane of thought. It totters here on the brink of incomprehensible absoluteness and eternity. And the voice of the silence speaks of nirvana as the changeless change. It is an oxymoron. It says, talk about the glorious state of absoluteness, the bliss past human thought, or the thrice glorious state of Dharmakaya, which is oblivion of the word and man forever. Here, there is an allusion to the doctrine of continuous becoming, the incessant activity that does not end with individual existence. Not even attaining nirvana puts those who reach the state beyond the realm of the law of constant motion. The notion of ceaseless action is a difficult concept for us to grasp too. Nirvana can be reached in two ways. Through enlightenment, as we said, which then means remaining there until the end of the Manvantara, or at the end of the Manvantara, when the pralaya will have brought back not only physical bodies and minds, but also spiritual egos to their spiritual principles, when everything will be reabsorbed by the great breeze and merged with Brahman. Regarding the first path, there is a significant ethical difference between those who have earned the right to nirvana but renounce it, and those who enter a state of, so to say, selfish bliss. Although they have all earned a nirvanic state, the former have done so on a higher buddhic plane than the latter. And HPB talks of the selfishness of those who have reached nirvana and enter it without thinking of those they had left behind. Meanwhile, others, the nirmanakayas or bodhisattvas, like the Buddha, renounce it because they believe it is terrible to be there and see the suffering and misery of those who remained. These nirmanakayas or bodhisattvas refuse to cross the threshold and go back to help humanity, inspire people, protect nations or communities, and do as much as karma permits them to help. And when the time for pralaya comes, some of them voluntarily guard the sleeping planet. It's a beautiful image, these Nirmanakayas guarding the sleeping planet like angels. I love this image. In the Mahatma letters, Nirvana is called the great reward because it makes us virtually gods, omniscient beings. It is said that those who live in Nirvana, at least for a certain time, which to us humans can seem almost eternal, are annihilated, wiped out, and extinguished, as far as our sphere is concerned, before karmic bonds attract them to coarser material again. They are not reincarnated and can only influence humanity in the form of energy, a spiritual energy that is very important to us humans. It surrounds and permeates us. However, this would be a good reason to accept the fact that there are beings that enter nirvana in order to help us from up there. But that is the case. Who is right? The ones who renounces or the others who enters nirvana to help us from there? We have a divine essence. And it is efflorescence. It has a great efflorescence and fullness of a very high nature, which varies depending on the nirvanic plane it has reached. But nirvana has also been called a state of absolute rest and assimilation with Parabrahman. And if we here remember that only manifestation is continuous motion. So does that mean that nirvana is not part of manifestation? There is sometimes some confusion between nirvana and devachan. What is the key difference between them? From a theosophical point of view, devachan is a stage in the post-mortem process. It is an intermediate step between two lives on earth, into which Atma, Buddhi, Manas, or the higher three parts, enter after being separated from the lower principles, the lower etheric, astral, mental, and physical bodies. In this state, people enjoy the results of the good deeds they did during the life that they have just lived, and receive compensation from undeserved suffering. They are surrounded by everything they sought in vain and by all those they loved on earth. They live long centuries full of unadulterated joy there, in a temporary state of supreme happiness. In accordance with their spiritual level, everyone will experience the joy of devachan, except for those souls that have committed sins for which there is no redemption, evils for which it is not possible to atone. Devachan is not a place, but a change in consciousness, which is why it is unique for each individual, reflecting their achievements. It is not necessarily a spiritual state, because it is still part of the illusion known as Maya. Naturally, it is an extremely selfish state during which the ego reaps the rewards for its good deeds on earth. Those who not fall prey to the illusion of personality don't enter devachan. And here we are referring to the highest adepts and initiates. Nirvana is complete elimination of all limitation. It is entering impersonal divinity. That is why it is called nirvana or swept away. Of course, nirvana is also a change in consciousness, but on a much more drastic scale. It is the monad on its pilgrimage, shaking off and freeing itself of all of its lower parts in terms of manifestation and entering a realm of perfect peace and bliss. This makes it supremely free. Supremely free. It lives in its essence. And while devachan is a place in consciousness, a delightful dream state where people can indulge in the things they adore most on earth, such as beauty, peace, love, happiness, philosophy, religion, music, art, and so on. Nirvana is consciousness and a vision of reality, with all of the veils that blinded the consciousness being removed. Now let us come back to the topic touched upon at the beginning, the so-called lost souls that have lost their grip on the words that are now above them, where we dwell. They will have to follow all of the paths again before they return to our levels. They too are annihilated, and the monad for which they were a vehicle must now give birth to a new human soul. However, huge amounts of time are wasted doing this, which is why sages call it one of humanity's greatest spiritual tragedies. These fallen entities are considered failures. These fallen souls really do descend into other spheres. We say that they go down into Avicii, where they enter Avicii Nirvana. All I can say about it is that these beings are pulverized over and over again in nature laboratory, and this obviously means that they are reduced to their basic parts, so that everything can begin all over again. And here I would like to quote the Mahatma letters, where there is a passage about those who fail in our sphere and fall into Avicii Nirvana. Let us take a look to it together. But at the close of the minor cycle, after the completion of all the 7 rounds, there awaits us no other mercy but the cup of good deeds, of merit, outweighing that of evil deeds and demerit in the scales of retributive justice. But irretrievably bad must be that ego that yields no might from its fifth principle and has to be annihilated to disappear in the eighth sphere. A might, as I say, collected from the personal ego suffices to have him from the dreary fate. Not so after the completion of the great cycle. Either along Nirvana of place, unconscious though it be, in thee, and according to your crude conceptions, after which life as a Dian Choan for a whole Manvantara, or else Avicii Nirvana, and a Manvantara of misery and horror as a. You must not hear the word, nor I pronounce or write it. But those have naught to do with the mortals who pass through the 7 spheres. The collective karma of a future planetary is as lovely as the collective karma of a is terrible. Enough. I have said too much already. I found it scary. Well, so there are 2 nirvanas that are the opposite to each other. The one is glorious and the other is hellish. In the theosophical view, Avicii is a state of misery experienced by those who have devoted their life to doing conscious harm. As a consequence, their personal egos have broken the connection with the spiritual individuality. Conscious harm breaks our link with light. This state is not necessarily only experienced after death, but can continue on the physical plane in a new incarnation as a soulless person, leading a life full of sins, turning more and more animalistic as time passes. The personality is eventually annihilated after one or several incarnations. Well, let us go back to the main topic of Nirvana, this great unknown. Because I would like now to share with you something about Nirvana and Occult Experience, a book written in 1926 by George Sydney Arundale. In it, Arundale describes his experience of Nirvana, and in doing so, He follows the occult rule requiring people to share what they have received with others. I have done this lecture because I read the book and it gave me such an enthusiasm that I decided to put things together and share them with people. So in this work, in his work, the author affirms that his first glimpse of the fundamental unity of that one life that unites all planes and all beings occurred to him in Taormina in 1912 when he was with J.K. and Nityananda. But this is another story that all of you know very well, and I don't want to digress. He was sitting at the window of his room at the hotel in Taormina, and I quote, I was listlessly dreaming. All of a sudden, my half-known seeing eyes rested on the orange grove in the little valley beneath, and I found myself peculiarly, wonderfully identified with the orange trees, with their very life and being. I was at my window, yet I was the orange grove. A gardener entered and began to pluck some of the oranges and to cut off some branches. All these things the gardener was doing to me. I rebelled, not as George Arundale might rebel, but as an orange groves apparently do rebel. He continues saying, I was conscious of discomfort, of loss, not exactly of pain, but something next door to it. I was the more discomforted because the gardener did not treat me reverently or affectionately, but as if I were inanimate, with no feelings, with no capacity of sensations. If he had only had the attitude of asking my permission, of begging my pardon for his actions, of conveying to me that I could make others happy by sharing myself with them, I should not have minded so much. This experience of consciousness in the vegetable kingdom opened before his eyes an entirely new conception of consciousness at different levels of unfoldment and of the implication of the all-embracing unity. And I quote, I have never been the same since. I have never been able to pluck a flower without silently explaining my reasons to the plant. And I have never found any lack of cooperation. I am more than ever a vegetarian. And he continued the story, affirming that from time to time he had other visions of this glorious unity, but none so inexpressible as that which was about Nirvana. And here we have again his words on this Nirvana experience. One night, I suddenly awoke with the most vivid remembrance of a supreme exaltation, of a marvelous expansion of consciousness. It was about 1 a.m., and part of me was very much disinclined to take the trouble to sit up and write, but another part of me insisted. So I sat up and wrote that with which this book begins. I knew it was Nirvana. I was immensely astonished, I confess, for I had never before given a thought to Nirvana. What I wrote was very strange to me at first. My waking consciousness was not accustomed to reflect nirvanic consciousness, and the process of remembrance was physically painful. I wrote for hours, he says, and was all aglow with exaltation. The whole of my being seemed reoriented. I was born again, and when the day came, I found all changed. A new note had been sounded in my being. New values had come to everything. Needless to say, even the most beautiful description of nirvana which could be conceived must inevitably be nothing less than a caricature of what it is in reality. Even a feeble attempt to indicate a shadow of nirvanic glories, they fall indescribably short of reality. It is nirvana, he says, as it appeared to me, of as much of nirvana as I have been able to assimilate. Much of the description is doubtless colored by my personality. There is no doubt that Arundale prepared long and hard, unconsciously, of course, for this experience, which he described as acting, perhaps only for a moment, the lowest riches and densest lawyers of Nirvana. And despite the brevity of the experience, it must have had an enormous impact to him. This is witnessed also by his good friend Leadbeater, who wrote in the foreword of the book, and I quote, "There is a living fire in his words," and it is true. That which he has seen can't be portrayed, yet the enthusiasm which he throws into the essay is so infectious that we feel ourselves on the very verge of understanding. This sense of indescribable wonder and extraordinary discovery shines through his words. For Arundale, Nirvana is the light divine, something whose glory can't be described or conceived. It made him return to earth with a new perception of reality, because there is a much greater comradeship in the world than we have ever imagined, a deeper identity, a more glorious origin, and a more glorious goal. There, in this Nirvana experience, light, color, and sound are defined as the words of the Absolute. Light, color, and sound. They are considered by Arundale his language, the language of the Absolute. He said that the power of light is everything. We live in a light eternity, he affirms, even if we are not aware of it. All that leads to light is right. This can be a slogan. All that is light is right. All that leads to light is right. The brighter the light is, the darker the shadows will be. In addition, we can say that the densest matter is no less divine than the most refined. Arundale, in his experience, sees the sun divine throw off sparks suns, charged with all his attributes. This divine light, imprisoned in a form, begins its long journey down, acquiring self-consciousness. Every atom of this light is unconscious divinity that will slowly become unfolded into self-conscious divinity. And it will be ever brighter in the evolved man. And here we can see the goal of our existence. Arundale sees colors everywhere in a process of continued transmutation, glorification, and transcendence. He says that there is no blackness anywhere, in the sense of negation of light. Arundale notes that there is nothing which is inanimate in manifestation. All things, he said, are vibrant with infinite potentiality. And he feels that he must do everything more carefully and deliberately, with a lighter touch and more delicacy. He realized that light is just one of the facets of Nirvana, and also tries to describe it in terms of sound and form. But obviously, Nirvana is beyond all of these. It is a manner of existence. He says that you can reach it by learning to transcend yourself, to be an alchemist transmuting the lower into the higher. And when experiencing this state, there is no becoming and nothing bound to time, only a perfect radiance with no beginning or end. Arundale says that he understands those great ones who choose not to come back and help humanity, but instead abide there, enfolding themselves in it until the end of time in complete bliss. He also states that the term nirvana does not even come close to defining it. Just one glimpse, and then coming back, all things seemed to be made new and shiny, but at the same time also inadequate, like shadows, compared to what he calls the real, with a capital letter, and also pure life. So it is not things who change, it is our way of considering them. And as he gradually grows accustomed to everything, he perceives and feels more at home than in his own home. He realizes that the only road that can be followed to enter in the light is to put yourself in the service of the light that lights every man. Nothing can extinguish this flame, however dimly it may glow. The light has an extraordinary magic power within it, like the philosopher's stone. One day, he says, the science of light will be recognized as the science of sciences. And here I can see something of quantic medicine, for example, but who knows? I'm not a scientist. Arundale states that after an experience like this, earthly issues become much more clearer, and many problems in life cease to be problems because the solution of them is obvious. The development of the nirvanic consciousness affects the brain, kundalini, and all the bodies of men. It takes a great deal of effort to keep the resulting sensitiveness under control, but this is counterbalanced by a great feeling of peace that acts as a shock absorber. Nonetheless, time will come when it will no longer be possible to live among people because it requires the use of energy which could be employed more beneficially in other conditions and situations. Arundale says that we cannot know God as he really is until we become fire. No spark that God lit with his divinity can ever die away. And during his nirvanic experience, Arundale saw with all his being, not just with his physical eyes, but of course, this is just what words can convey about his experience. He also gained a clearer vision both of inside himself and of the duty he had to perform. He realized that those who serve the masters must be supremely free from all attachment. Arundale stated that entering nirvanic consciousness modifies every vehicle of our being, making life stupendous beyond conception. And I quote, "You come to see that even the little things contribute to great ends, and everything is imprisoned splendor, sacred to all our senses." He reminds us that nirvana is everywhere, and we only need to perceive it. He talks of theosophical centers as places for the expansion of the world's consciousness. And those he describes as masters in the nirvanic regions are suffused with even higher effulgences, which he can sense but is incapable of saying nothing about. He states that everything belongs to everything, and everything is dependent upon all the rest. Each entity with its own small life, yet enfolded in the one universal life, a part of the great whole. And another surprising concept is that of God the Mother, which Arundel highlights because he feels it is neglected compared to the concept of God the Father. Although they are equal, the Mother Light impresses him with her regal majesty, the dignity of her holiness, and the feeling of protection, refuge, and healing she gives. He says that, in this great ocean of peace lives every woman in the world, in all worlds, and every woman should know herself to be a priestess of this light. He calls upon all mothers to become champions of the holiness of their bodies, which are shrines of light. And he continues affirming that every pregnant woman is a temple of our Lord. And now, shortly before closing, the perils of Nirvana. While Nirvanic consciousness brings marvelous gifts to an equal or perhaps greater extent, it also brings responsibilities. It is necessary to live up to the new, higher life because to fall from such heights would be a very serious matter. To hold even a reflection of nirvanic consciousness is to live dangerously, according to Arundale. He says that everything that happens to you is immeasurably intensified. Your various bodies are infinitely more sensitive to external vibrations, while every word, feeling, thought, and action is charged with far greater power. This power may be used for good or for evil, but it would be too dangerous to allow it to flow in the wrong direction. The human machine is delicate, so every weakness is amplified and increased. He says that he does not recommend the experiment to anyone, except under very adequate safeguards, because life is much more wonderful and meaningful, but you can't cease to be watchful over yourself for even an instant. And in this respect, it would be much more simple to withdraw and live a secluded life. This is something that eventually becomes inevitable, remarks Arundale. So, dear friends, of course, Arundale is not the only one to have had an experience of this kind. Various people have talked about going through the same thing, which provides us with some reassurance about the soundness of what Arundel had to say. And so, to end my talk, I would like to corroborate my words by reading with you the description that Reverend B. W. Castleberry gave of one of these astounding experiences. Every thought, every feeling, every action seemed beautiful and complete to me, with a harmony that I did not even know existed. Everything seemed to be expressed in terms of light. The woods were a mass of light. My friends looked like living flames. I felt wonderfully radiant, shining in the reflection of all creation. It was such a powerful experience that I had to go out and seek solitude. I walked for miles and miles without getting tired, forgetting about the stunning beauty of my body and losing myself in the radiance all around me, in the larger, immense, and luminous body that I felt was my true reality. Nothing seemed impossible. I felt like a free spirit in the true sense of the word. So, dear friends, I hope and wish to all of us that we can experience the same feeling of freedom, the same glory, the same light, and the same reality. Thank you for listening.